Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your lead analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined as always by managing editor Ross Binder and publisher Adam Jacoby at Hawkeye Beacon. Before we get started, make sure that you subscribe on YouTube if you're listening there. Drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know how you're feeling right now because it can't be good after that performance by the Iowa Hawkeyes, who finished the season 8-5 after a 27-24 loss to Missouri in the Music City Bowl. Of course, before we get started, make sure you subscribe as well if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. That way you don't miss an episode. Drop that 5-star rate and review. Helps us out a lot on both of those platforms. So, going into this one, looked really promising in the first half. That score to make it 21-14 before half really set things up for the second half to go Iowa's way. They get a field goal, they're up 24-14, and then things go completely and utterly sideways for the Iowa offense. And they drop it. How many points? It was 13 unanswered points by Missouri at one point in the second half. So just a game where they had it in the back pocket, had it in their back pocket, and then ultimately lost. This is the third time that's happened. That's something that's got brought up in the post game presser. Third time that's happened this season. UCLA, Iowa State, and then Missouri. And that's not something that's really ever happened before in Iowa football. And we're going to do our three takeaways, but I want to ask you guys about that before we do that because this is something you guys have been around covering Iowa a lot longer than I have. This is almost unprecedented. The double digit leads resulting in a loss is there's three of them this season. I was talking to another beat writer after the game about it, and Iowa was like 78-5 over Kirk's tenure, including this year when they have a double digit lead in the second half, and three of those losses happened this season. And I hope I'm not butchering that, but it was something atrocious like that. So, Adam, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, it is. Um, I don't remember how long the streak goes back, Ross. Maybe you have that information, or maybe you will within the next 90 seconds while I ramble. However, I do know that it is five losses, and three of them came this year, and it was for leads of not even double digits, but eight or more points. And for all of the weird and convoluted stats that always come up, like in certain situations, how certain teams do. It's always the small ones. It's always the most direct ones. It wasn't 8 points in the fourth quarter with more than 7.5 minutes and when the quarterback runs for 12. Yeah. No, it was just an 8 point lead that they were so near automatic with it. And then all of a sudden, Ross, what's the official tally here?
Yeah, so from 2015 to 2023, Iowa was 67-2 when they had a 10 or more point lead at any point during the game. This year, they went 7-3 with those same conditions, with having a lead of 10 or more points. So three games they ended up losing, and obviously in the 8-9 years prior to that, they only lost twice in that scenario. So yeah, you're right, Elliot. This was a big outlier year in terms of being able to finish games. That was something I was taking a lot of pride in that over the years under Kirk Ferentz and especially Phil Parker and the defense. They kind of treated it as, once the offense gets them that lead, or sometimes they give themselves that lead with defensive scores or special team scores, then they, lock it in and lock it down. And that has not happened in full this year. There was another stat that came up during the broadcast, which was that Iowa, I think, was undefeated since 2021 or 2022, when they score at least 21 points, I think it was, they mentioned on
Yeah.
ESPN. And obviously they scored 24 today and ended up losing anyway. So yeah, this was kind of a streak breaker in some ways, or I guess in that a streak reinforcer. I don't know. It's too late. Um, but yeah, this was a weird season in several ways. What would you agree with that, Adam?
Yeah, quite a bit. And those are results that are especially would have been difficult to see coming with the fact that Iowa had such a senior loaded defense coming back. And the fact that they missed Cooper DeJean a whole lot, more than anybody expected, clearly. But the fact that they weren't able to build up that back end depth at the cornerback position, a little bit surprising. Uh, Perhaps more surprising to me, though, was the regression from some of the senior leaders on the team. Or not even the seniors, but just some of the returners per se. Xavier Wampa had a miserable year this year compared to last. Quinn Schulte, not nearly as good. Sebastian Castro, no longer getting that, dark horse All-American sort of talk either, And I think both of those, or really anybody that we're talking about here, would self-evaluate in the same way, right? This isn't trying to take a cheap shot at guys going away or anything like that. Objectively, you look at their PFF, you look at their missed tackles, you look at the defense's production as a whole, which, when they're shutting teams out, they're happy to spread that praise around. But you look at the end results and you look at these opportunities to make plays that a Schulte or a Wampa has and over doesn't really make that play. It's a team effort, it's a team failure, and it's a regression from um, where these standards were coming off of 2023 season. So, yeah, that part of it, having all these seniors be part of blowing leads, not being able to reward an offense for scoring 24 points. That part, you can really say you didn't see coming. I don't think anybody did.
And the difference between this season and last season, I think does come down to Cooper DeJean. I think it also comes down to, well, I guess something that's really weird is that they generated more turnovers this year, if I'm remembering correctly.
They
Um,
did.
so like it's counterintuitive. It's just an odd year. And I mean, I think we saw it today, and maybe we can. This is a really good segue into our three takeaways. Each of us kind of got this together as our three main takeaways from today's game. And number one, almost number one, but one of I guess obviously because there's only three, but one of them being defensive back the play, the secondary. I mean, Brady Cook cooked the secondary. Like there was just open receiver after open receiver. Marquise Johnson had 15 catches for like 179 yards going into this game, and he looked like an NFL receiver today. There were times where Brady Cook, I mean, the concern for us, I think, going into this one was that the secondary would look like it did against Michigan State. And I think that's exactly what happened. No, John Nestor wasn't out there. He wasn't, victimized by Aiden Childs like he was, Brady Cook like he was like by Aiden Childs. But it was just open receiver after open receiver. And several times Missouri beat themselves with dropped passes. Like this was not a scenario where you look at it and say, well, had this thing gone their way, had that thing gone their way, because there were several things that did go their way in terms of drop passes that set them up for success. They didn't come away with a turnover. Xavier Wampa got beat several times and then replaced by Zach Lutmer, just like a completely lackluster performance. And Ross, you were very much on board with me saying some of these things before we started podcasting. So I'll go to you first on this one.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. I mean, the guys that, we don't want to call out players, but or anything, but like there were guys that just didn't play well today. And, there are guys that have played well in the past, which, to get to what Adam said, that's kind of what makes it surprising is, you've seen these guys perform well, they're capable of it. And, we've just seen things be a little bit off this year, especially with those safeties and the cornerbacks. The lack of Cooper and then the lack of Jamari the last few games has been noticeable. They've tried to patch things up as best they can with the guys that are available, and you mentioned the Michigan State game, and that's exactly what it looked like. There were just a lot of open receivers, a lot of time in the pocket for Brady Cook quite often. And, he had 280 yards. And like you said, there's quite a bit of meat left on the bone there in terms of drop passes and opportunities not fully taken by Missouri. And so this was as rough as we've seen a Phil Parker secondary look, just as a whole this season, I would say, in several years. Even though I mean, the takeovers were there, like they ended up with I say takeovers, I meant turnovers, obviously, takeaways, turnovers. So they had 16 this year versus 10 a year ago. So they had more interceptions, but if they weren't getting those picks, there was a lot of drives that just kept going or ended in touchdowns or field goals or other scoring opportunities. The stops were not nearly as plentiful, especially against an accurate quarterback, which Cook was definitely pretty accurate today.
Yeah, Cook is that type of veteran QB that knows how to not make, sort of the mistakes that Iowa forces worse quarterbacks into. And that always gave me a little bit of concern. The fact that Mizzou, when excuse me, when Cook was healthy enough, was happy using him in designed runs as well as scrambles. And, we saw plenty of that too. So I was always worried more about Brady Cook than anyone else on that Missouri offense, especially with Burden out. And sure enough, Iowa's defense did do one job pretty well in that they made Mizzou pretty much one-dimensional, or at the very least, two-dimensional, but they were both Brady Cook's dimensions, for lack of a better, way to phrase it. But ultimately, this wasn't about the ground game. Nate Noel wasn't entirely shut down, but this wasn't the Tigers winning the game by grinding it out. This wasn't Iowa can't do anything to stop those 5 yards. You know, it wasn't that sort of demoralizing. It was Brady Cook is going to find an open receiver whenever he wants one. And I think a little bit of credit does sort of have to go to, I believe it's Kirby Moore. Yeah, their offensive coordinator, QB's coach. That's a well-run offense that they've got. And the fact that they didn't need somebody, who's a singular talent like Burden to make it run is sort of a testament to, how that offense was run. And
And
guys, like
then
you said, what's up?
I was going to say, not only was Burden not there, but Weiss, their other top receiver from this season, he had a good, first half. Then he goes out with an injury, and so yeah, they were cooking Iowa, no pun fully intended, with third and fourth string receivers today. So
Right. Yeah. And those were, you know, next man in situations, and those guys were put into position to succeed with more or less easier throws, certainly like makeable throws. And Cook's got a bigger sort of repertoire of makeable throws than, say, Brendan Sullivan does. But ultimately, when you're looking at how these two quarterbacks, approached the game, especially when those drives really started to matter, you saw one quarterback with a whole lot more leash than the other one. And that's how Missouri was, along with a couple favorable calls, uh, able to sustain those drives and ultimately, get those 13 unanswered points and win. They let their quarterback win the game for them, and Iowa didn't.
I don't. To that point, for 1 second, Adam, officiating did not cost Iowa this game whatsoever. We're
No,
not
no,
we're not going to
no.
say
It
that.
didn't cost them
That
that. No,
no,
no.
but that late hit call on Schulte was
That was garbage.
absolute nonsense, just ridiculous.
That happens every time a player goes out of bounds. What are we
Yeah,
doing? I don't know,
yeah.
and I don't know about the non-call that Kirk wanted and that some folks were clamoring for at the end of the game on that 4th and 1. But it looked like the guys were in the neutral zone on the frame that I've seen. I don't know, but I mean, I was on way
Yeah,
behind,
that was
so I don't know.
that was a chaotic looking play. So it was just
That
kind of
was
a
a
mess.
disaster before it was
Yeah.
snap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
So.
looked bad in all kinds of ways, frankly.
Right. So, yeah, you're right, Ross. To make that point, the officials did not lose this game for Iowa by any means. Speaking of what you just made a point of, Adam, talking about the offense, the way you just put it was that Iowa didn't let their quarterback win the game for them. Do you think that Brendan Sullivan could have won this game for Iowa?
I'm not sure. I think it's possible. It's plausible. Do I think he would have? No, but there were three instances where Kirk Ferentz could have, at the very least, taken a little bit of a risk. And we're talking about a 3rd and 2 where they went with some weird, fake jet sweep with the sort of timing and snap quality that they hadn't had all day, right? That it was doomed from the get-go. And two punts in game situations that really did not ask for them. One was in field goal range. One was with 3 minutes left and punting back to a guy that you hadn't held to a 3-and-out all game long. It turned out that worked out, but Iowa never really, even with the, Shankopotamus punt by Mizzou coming back, that was still, you're really expecting to roll double sixes at that point. And you did, congrats, but that can't be more preferable than going for it on 4th and 2 with your goal line QB, right? That those are situations where Brendan Sullivan earned his way onto the field first, and then the keys get taken away from him in situations like this where all you're playing for is a trophy of what, like a football with a music note incorporated somehow. Why is that not a situation where you say, all right, win it or not?
There were multiple occasions that you mentioned that 3rd and 2 that resulted in the 4th and 2 where they didn't go for it. Why the hell not hand the ball off to Jazz Patterson? He's getting whatever he wants the whole game. And so,
The
I mean,
whole
for the
game.
most, Kamari Moulton was too. They were averaging over 8 yards per carry going into the fourth quarter. Why the hell not hand the ball off? And even in that situation, you would probably assume the defense assumes you're going to run the ball, but they've assumed it before and they're still not able to stop it. One and two, play action. Then, if you're not going to just run it, run play action. I really, really don't understand. And to me, the folks on Twitter have said, "Oh, this is all Kirk's fault." Who? But do we know that? I mean, were
No.
you in the ear of Tim Lester and Kirk Ferentz during the game? I mean, I'm not saying that there's no shot, but I mean, play calling today was really, really good in the first half and really, really conservative and bad in the second half.
And that part is what really surprised me. Because we saw, especially in that first drive of the game, and I get that there's some, scripting and all that involved here. But on that first drive of the game, Brendan Sullivan looked like a Bo Prabula who kind of guy. That was exactly what you wanted to see out of him as his audition for the 2025 season as QB1. So the capability is clearly there.
That's what I was planning on writing going into the second half.
Right.
Holy. I mean, he started the game 6 of 6 for 79 yards and a touchdown. It's like this is what you need. I mean, the offense was like a hot knife through butter on that first drive.
He was throwing some darts, and he
He
was kind of
was.
they were mixing up the plays and mixing up the throws. Like there's a lot to like on that first drive, and then we didn't see too much of that the rest of the game, unfortunately.
And that that would have made a lot of sense. Well, made more sense last year with the defense that Iowa had and the offense that Iowa had last year. But to go nervous turtle in the second half when you've got a 10-point lead, a dynamic quarterback, and a run game that is fully working on almost every handoff. I mean, it's beyond confusing. It's like you had that game in your back pocket, and it's just been so much of the same with that. And I mean, if this is a scenario where folks are like it's Kirk's fault, if that's true, well, let's just entertain it for a second and say it's true that he would not let Lester cook, so to speak, and call all the plays and give him free reign in the second half. Then But you probably shouldn't do that going forward anymore. If you're gonna say that this is Tim Lester's offense, if you're gonna say this it's his, let him make the calls, except for in maybe dire situations, then do that. Time for an old dog to learn new tricks. If that's the case, again, if we don't know, we're not in the ear, we're not, and hopefully we learn a little bit more about that. Talking to a few people, of course, that's for our premium subscribers. But I mean, something was wrong. Who's to blame? Who's not to blame? I mean, all we can really tell you is that the on-field product did not work in the second half. Just full stop.
Also, Elliot, just to be clear, there's a few reporters who are in a few of those years, and a whole lot of them were coming into this game crowing about how Iowa was about to open up the passing game, right? Like they were going to show it all off because they had to, and of course that didn't happen either. So, like, there's always some disinformation going on. So the point is, though, regardless of whose fault it is, or who gets to be the boogeyman going into the offseason, ultimately, Iowa has to, if Iowa is really going to upgrade at the quarterback position, this was not the way to show the world that it's serious about upgrading its quarterback play,
Nope.
right? Even if Kirk Ferentz is saying, the what Kirk Ferentz doesn't really realize, and what some of the slicker coaches have, is that you're always recruiting whether or not you want to be recruiting. And if there's somebody who is thinking about being Iowa's next quarterback, and they watch that bowl game and they see 4th and 2 punt from the 40, they see, like, oh, you know you get 3 incompletions in the Music City Bowl, and that's it, and we're still taking the keys away from you. You know, you're not really sending the message that you're serious about running a 21st century offense yet. You're just not. Not to the point that someone's going to say, I don't know, choose Missouri's offer over yours.
Yes. 100%. And we had folks in the or on the premium board. Somebody posted it saying that Iowa needs better receivers. And yeah, I mean, like you're absolutely not wrong. But you have to provide a product where people watch it and say, "Oh, make something." Like if you really fully give the reins to Lester, what Lester needs to do and what the offense needs to do is put players in positions to be successful, right? To be successful, where you put the ball in their hands and good things happen, and you allow them to make plays, and you make, designs. And then when there is success, then you can start being like, hey, look what we did with less. We did more with less. Imagine what you could do here. But then you have a second half like this, where you go again, nervous turtle. And it's not even, I think my biggest gripe for like the Iowa State game, there was that end around with TJ Washington where he slipped. I felt like Iowa got a little too cute. This game is very different. It was a combination of Michigan State plus doing the classic Iowa thing where they're playing not to lose rather than playing to win. And that combination got you this loss. You have to be willing to trust your players in those moments. And while Kirk may tell you that he does, we didn't see that today. We didn't see that. And I mean, I wrote this article, and this is something that I think we're ready to segue into in talking about quarterback play. Um, Brennan Sullivan, I think there were opportunities there for him to win the game. Maybe not win the game, but at least not lose the game, if you will. That interception, that's a throwaway, especially when it's a receiver there, or when it's a freshman receiver rather, on the sideline, like you mentioned before we started podcasting, Adam. That sack that he took, second and 24, you can't take that. You can't. You have to throw it away. And I mean, and then TJ Washington gets 90% of it back on that second and 24. He gets 19 of it. And then there's that short pass to Gill where he's just short, and then you don't get it on the fourth and short. It's just like There are multiple things that went wrong there, but the sack and the interception just flat out cannot happen. I mean, they just can't. You just got to know when to throw it away. And what he said post game is like, and what Kirk has said is like, you just have to know when you're not Superman, right? You have to know when to make the smart play, and he didn't recognize that moment.
I think there was another sack in the first half too, where he held onto the ball too long. There was nothing there, and he ended up kind of tripping over his own feet or something, and went down. So yeah, there's just a little just one thing I remember Sullivan talking about after I think it was the UCLA game was he had kind of a tendency sometimes for like bad plays to snowball. He kind of like was kind of trying too hard, I think, to kind of overcome a bad play or turn things around. And I think we saw a little bit of that in the second half again. He's just trying, to get things going and trying to, oh, I made a bad play. I want to do something better. And then, that's just not quite the way it works best. Typically you just need to, flush that play entirely, start over new, and then, make a good play, hopefully from there. But, just always chasing those kind of bad plays and trying to, avenge them doesn't work out. And, he's, I think he was better at that for a while, but the second half was still some of those bad habits. So there's definitely a lot of stuff for him to work on in the off season.
Yeah, we're talking about a guy who really had these bad habits, even going back to Northwestern too, and that's why he, sort of has this habit of losing QB races. And if you even go back to, when he was playing against Iowa, Iowa sacked him a bunch of times, and both times that they played against him, and his QB sack rate was something like 20% as a Northwestern Wildcat. Deacon Hills was in the single digits, guys. Like this is, and so as much as it's easy to sort of be impressed by, and you should be impressed by somebody who's always, the first guy into the, building every morning, the last guy to leave, which is something that we've, heard about Sullivan a lot of times. Ultimately, I don't think that you can process your way, like you can structure your day as long enough to really get over the like what decisions am I making in that moment if I'm going to be QB1 at a team that's got national championship, or at the very least like playoff flavored dreams, right? Like those are on the table now. And so, as much as Sullivan is doing the right things, in the off season, you know, during the week and all that, ultimately, he's got to earn it on the field here too. And you see these instances where you would understand why Ferentz would say, "Oh, oh, maybe Mr. Prebula ought to hear from us after all, right?" So you understand this like frustration and dichotomy that's going on. But yeah, so many instances for Sullivan to really earn this in the second half. A little disappointing that when the lights weren't at the brightest, that Ferentz wasn't giving him those key opportunities. Like, all right, lose it on fourth down. Don't be scared of him losing it on fourth down. Win or lose, you're going to lose either way, or like the outcome's going to happen either way. You might as well at least try to earn it. And so, yeah, a little disappointing to see that trust get eroded so quickly in real time, I would say.
My thing is ultimately that Sullivan also didn't lose this game for Iowa, right? There were a lot of things that went wrong. But this is something that Iowa has at least some control over. They can go out and get a quarterback that will, at the very least, compete with Brendan Sullivan. And I think that's what you need. If you can't go get, top tier quarterback XYZ, of course, we've had our conversations about who that might be in the portal on our premium board and in our premium content. And I do think that there are options out there, and there may well be more options here sooner rather than later. Now, I'm not defaulting to that right now because we've passed the major December window, right? And quarterbacks have been picked up. Pribula is going to Missouri, right? Um, but there's a certain contingent in there. One, more bowl games are going to be over here in the next few days, therefore more portal entries. Playoff is not over. I think the FCS has yet to wrap up. Of course, you don't necessarily want to rely on FCS, but there are currently options and there may be more. And if you're Iowa, you can improve here. This is something you can control. You can control going out and I mean, at least to a degree, you can recruit these guys. You can control what you can control, right? You can't guarantee you're going to go get somebody. You can't guarantee you're going to land anybody, but you have money in Swarm. They've clearly shown. I mean, you're not going to get Prabula if they didn't have that money, and that was clearly not a factor in his recruitment. That's been said publicly by Brad Heinrichs. They said they chose or Prabula chose Missouri because of the system and repeated success, right? That Iowa just doesn't have. Iowa's collective in the Swarm. They have the money to make things happen. You can sell potential via Tim Lester, right? You can sell these opportunities were here. The system is here. You can become an NFL quarterback here with this system because that's what you'll learn at the next level. And Sullivan has shown some really good things. He's better than Cade McNamara. Better than Cade McNamara. More dynamic. He's an athlete. Doesn't have elite arm talent. Decision making is questionable. You can go and get somebody better in the portal, more than likely. If not equal or close to, and make him earn the job in the spring and in the fall.
Gronowski announced that he is entering the portal, correct?
Yeah, he's already entered the portal. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I was just trying to get.
I didn't know if we were
check
like
out our
intentionally
stuff.
dancing
No.
around him in particular. But like
Mark Gronowski of SDSU is a guy who's in the portal that has won national championships at the FCS level. Look, I've covered the FCS level. Dude's legit. Iowa should go get him. Fine. Is that what you wanted me to say?
I mean, it's all public.
Yeah. That's number one. Drop the bag, Brad. That's all I would say regarding there. And Kirk and whatever. I think the efforts there at Swarm are very legitimate and they're trying, folks. It's not because they're not trying. We'll say that. But there are options, and one of those options is Mark Gronowski, and I think that would be a huge upgrade. Kid is from Chicago. They've won. SDSU has won 2 of the last 3 national titles, and they just went to the semifinals this last year. This is not. Somebody had said that we should get somebody who hasn't been playing against Southern Illinois and Indiana State. Well, they haven't just been playing against Southern Illinois and Indiana State. They've been playing against these traditional fellow powerhouses in North Dakota State, and not to mention the MVFC, the conference that SDSU's in, is the class of the FCS. This is the best conference that continually wins the national championship. Mark Gronowski is the best quarterback, if not the best quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the FCS, and deserves a spot on a Power 4 roster somewhere. He's a winner. Like that's what Iowa, loves. I mean, what was Kirk's quote? Wins per game as opposed to yards per game last year or points per game. Mark Gronowski wins. That's what he does. Flat out. He's a Power 4 quarterback. He's mobile. He's a playmaker. He's got a better arm than Brennan Sullivan. Got a better arm than probably a lot of other Power 4 quarterbacks. You can get Gronowski. You go freaking get Gronowski.
Agreed.
I thought Ross was about to say that. But no, I completely agree. And yeah, he is to me like the example of what you would actually want a guy who's running a Tim Lester offense to play like. Because as much as Brendan Sullivan's athleticism is eye-popping and it's a lot of fun to watch him operate in the open field and make guys miss and do that sort of shopper's value Seneca Wallace run in that first half. I really wish that that play hadn't been in a losing effort because that would have been in a lot of Iowa highlight reels otherwise. But ultimately, you want a guy with that steadier leadership. You want a guy with a more accurate arm, quite frankly. You want a guy with that pedigree of success at that FCS level, like you mentioned, Elliot. This is
He's a seventh year. He's a seventh year guy
right,
who
right,
has
and
continually won. And I mean, like I've heard the guy talk at media availability. Remember, folks, I used to cover UNI and I used to see Mark Gronowski eat UNI's lunch every time they played each other. This dude is like he would fit in so well at Iowa. He would fit in so well. And he'd be a guy that would be I think the fan base would love him and love him quickly. Any quarterback they bring in that is of that caliber is gonna be, anointed as the savior before he takes a snap. But Gronowski could, I don't know about be a savior, right? Like we wouldn't know until he puts on a helmet in Iowa City, but um, he'd be
I
an
think he
upgrade.
would be. I think he is the closest you would get to running what Tim Lester imagines a pro Green Bay style offense would be. I think that's how you get there. And just one more little point about some of the competition arguments that you made earlier. One, Carson Wentz was also throwing against Southern Illinois and Indiana State too. So was Trey Lance, and we're talking about you know top picks in the NFL draft. And two, you know Cooper DeJean wasn't playing against elite talent at, OABCIG.
Oh wow, you nailed it. I'm wearing a shirt from when they won
How about
state.
that? There we go.
My little
And,
brother
and,
was on that team. He wasn't very good.
and like ultimately you can only blame the competition or derive so much from the competition. If you're a baller, you're a baller, right? At some point, the talent finds its own level and plays to it. You give Gronowski a chance, I think better things are going to happen.
You know who else played FCS football? Kurt fucking Warner. Like, what are we doing here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys have to say? I mean, Caden Weegan put the kid on scholarship. Like, what are
Yeah.
we doing here? Kirk made
I'm
like
surprised it hasn't happened
I
already. Like,
yeah, Kirk was
as in
like
like right now, this many hours after the game, hasn't happened already.
right. And I've seen some people say NIL and save the scholarship. What? No,
No,
Caden's earned it, man. And like give him some disposable income. God, the kid's an all-American. Put him on freaking scholarship. I said it. If he's not on, if he isn't put on scholarship the moment they land in Iowa City, we riot. And I will be at the front with a pitchfork standing outside Kinnick Stadium.
I know
Yeah,
we're trying to wrap up real quick here, but just in terms of because we always see this argument about save the scholarship, NIL, something else. No, 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 no. If guys earn these opportunities, they get them. If you earn the scholarship, you get it. It doesn't like this is not a need-based sort of thing. This is not what if we start playing fast and loose with scholarships? That's what Nebraska and Tom Osborne did in the 80s, right? Like this is not a Prop 48 situation. And ultimately, it also doesn't matter because we're going to roster size instead of scholarship or non-scholarship.
That'll that'll
Like
that'll it'll matter for Iowa. It'll still matter for Iowa, from what I'm told.
from an accounting standpoint as much as anything, but like ultimately, like it doesn't
Yeah,
matter as much as it used to, is
sure.
what I'm saying. And
It's for like the principle of it. If anything,
right, right.
like Iowa can
Yeah.
afford, they've got scholarships. They've got from our tally, which we'll have for 2025 probably tomorrow, scholarship chart. They'll have plenty of scholarships to go around. They'll probably be sticking around a certain number for scholarships that they give out with this 105 roster limit for the principle of it. This kid grew up a Hawkeye. He joined as a walk-on and is an all-American who returned a kick for a touchdown that kept you within striking distance of this game. He had that punt return. He's a phenomenal returner. Probably going to be more involved in the offense next year, assuming he does, fulfill that 98% he mentioned the other day. You just this is this is like an integrity. It's the principle of it. Give him the
It's
scholarship.
self-evident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. I mean, what else am I going to say? Like, he's been awesome all year. He was phenomenal today. I mean, 100-yard kick return. It was tremendous. And shout out to Zach Lutmer on that play too, by the way. He was doing a hell of a job blocking all the way down the field. But yeah, everything you guys said is 110% true. I mean, Weechin has deserved a scholarship probably before this season even started, honestly. And everything he's done this season has only reinforced that. Like, there's no argument against it. You know, there's no trying to be cute and like, oh, keep him on as a walk-on and put that money elsewhere. Like, that's just dumb. Like, don't even think about it that way. Just, he deserves to be a scholarship player. He should be a scholarship player. Just do it. Like, just don't make this any more complicated than it has to be, because it's not complicated at all.
No, it is not. Ross with the hot takes today. Agreed. All right, folks. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of HawkCast. Of course, we have all our bowl coverage at Hawkeye Beacon for you there. We're going to have way more the rest of the week, looking ahead all the way to next season. What guys need to perform in spring, who are watching. Of course, transfer portal coverage there at iwithoutrivals.com. And though football is over, we will have coverage of men's and women's basketball as well throughout the remainder of the season. Recruiting a big name going to be on campus here soon. You can learn all about that at iwithoutrivals.com/subscribe if you're not with us there. So do that today. And before we get out of here, make sure that you subscribe here at our YouTube channel. Drop a like, drop a comment. Again, as always, a safe space here at Hawkeye Beacon. Let it out there in the comments and let us know what you're thinking, how you're feeling about the program and about the loss. And of course, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, subscribe, leave that rate and review. Helps us out a lot. And of course, gets more people talking about the Hawkeyes, which of course you love to do. For now, folks, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby. We will see you next time.